name is Štruncová. I'm from the Czech Republic, and you may know me as the co-founder of the Lucy Clay company. And we founded that company with my father and the family, and we've been creating tools and equipment for polymer clay. But the truth is that the last couple of years I've only behind the Polymer Week, where we publish publications and products and organize events and classes for the polymer clay community. And in this case, we partnership with the Clay Earring Summit. And I'm more than happy to also share with you my class, which is called Tube Earrings. And we are going to create a couple of earrings from polymer clay using several tubes and different mediums and also stenciling technique. So let's get to start.
First of all, let's mix some color. Next to the white regular polymer clay, you will also need a mixture of gold and white together, which will create a nice effect. The third sheet is a mixture of translucent and white clay, which will create a semi-translucent effect in the end. And on top of that, we are going to add a little bit of pigment. This is a highly saturated pigment, so you only need to add a little bit. You can use a tip of your blade or a scalpel or some sort of spoon and add a little bit of those on the top of your sheet of clay. Fold the sheet with the pigments inside together and then very carefully mix in your pasta machine, and you will achieve a wonderful semi-translucent teal color like that. Here are all the colors that I've been playing with during this project. I also added a very light blue, and in the end I conditioned a translucent clay, which is going to be very important. Take the first sheet of white and gold beige color as well, and you can cut those sheets in half. Each sheet shall be around 1 millimeter thick, and after placing those sheets exactly next to each other, you can burnish that with a piece of paper. I'm using here a baking paper and a roller and just trying to attach them so they are connected nicely. And afterwards it's time to use the metal stencils. I couldn't find any proper metal stencils for polymer clay, so I designed them by myself. And this is one of my most favorite patterns with the little squares. Place the stencil on those two sheets connected together, slightly roll over with a roller, and cut every single axis around. Now it's time to open a gold pigment which has a beautiful shimmering, and by using a very soft brush you can simply add a thin layer of the pigment over the stencil. I'm usually working only with a little bit of the pigment in the lid of the packaging because otherwise I would have it everywhere around. So there is just a little amount needed to cover the full sheet of clay with the stencil. And just make sure that there is no mess around your place because the pigment is highly concentrated. When you are done, make sure that there is no additional pigment on the top and carefully peel off the stencil out of the sheet and try not to bend it too much, otherwise you would damage the stencil. And this is how the final result look like. But now we are going to cover it with a very thin sheet of translucent clay. And to make it even thinner, you can stretch the sheet with your hands just like that. And then carefully add it over the sheet with the pigment. You can work slowly, it will take some time, but it's important not to leave any additional air between those two layers. And then cut all the excess around with a sharp blade. And make sure that there are also no tiny bubbles inside. You can pierce them with a sharp scalpel or a needle tool and then burnish the full sandwich of those two sheets over a piece of paper with your fingers or with a roller. Now for making tubes out of polymer clay, you will need metal tubes, which can be brass or aluminium. You will find them in a hobby store, or maybe your husband can have them in the garage. And once you are ready with the single sheet, now it's also time to decide about the size of your earrings. I'm working here with a sheet of around 4 centimeters wide, cutting off all the excess. And now I'm going to turn over the sheet. I took the biggest tube and I'm placing that on the back of the sheet and carefully attaching the very end of the sheet to the tube. I want them to stick enough so I can roll it later. And by using a sharp rigid blade, I am here cutting the top, which I will not be using anymore, and I want it to be perfect. Now rolling the sheet over the tube, I'm marking where the other end is, cutting that through, and that shall give me a perfect edges. I can roll it all together and pinch. The important aspect is that there is no seam visible, so I'm doing my best to pinch it all together and smooth the edges and connect both ends in a way that you would not recognize where I cut it. Once that is done, use a little bit of scrap clay. You can use 2 balls, place them on the tile, the tube on top of that so it won't touch the base. And in the same way, you can create many other tubes of different colors you pre-mixed before. After 30 minutes of baking, it's time to cool it down and then take off each tube from the metal base. Sometimes it's a bit tricky and you can use, for example, a scalpel. Pliers also are a great help when you are trying to get off the clay from the metal base. And it again takes a little bit of time, depends on how good job you actually did before, but after a while you can get them out of the metal base. You can see how beautifully they turned out with the translucent layer on top of that, which actually protects the pigment. Now using the rigid blade again, cut off the edges to make sure that the end of each tube is perfect, and then you can use a sanding paper or sanding mesh to make sure that the edges and both ends are just perfect and even. And again, take some time and make sure that those 2 tubes are perfectly the same when it comes to the size, because obviously these are going to be the earrings and they need to be the same. Using an older sanding block, you can slightly sand the whole tube, and then do the same with every single tube that you made. Again, making sure that every pair is perfectly the same. And here I'm playing with other color combinations. I usually make more than I need, because in the end sometimes I'm changing my mind. So you can do the same and decide at the very end which color combination and the combination of sizes would fit you perfectly. Prepare the tubes for each earring, and now it's time to connect them all together. Use a little bit of scrap clay and place the tubes exactly the way you would love to attach them together, because that will help you and they will not move. And this is the wire we shall get in for the earring hoop. So it's time to decide into which tube the earring hoop is going to go. Use a little bit of super gel glue. Using a toothpick, create a line of the super glue on one of the tubes. And now it's time to attach them together. So I'm attaching here those 2 biggest ones, hiding the seam in the middle. Take a little bit of scrap clay of the teal one and create a thin snake that you will attach in the middle of those 2 tubes by using a liquid clay. That will help to get even a stronger connection when baked in the oven, because the super glue, it's not something we can rely on when using polymer clay. Cut the excess with scalpel and then take a silicone brush so you can smooth the seam and nothing is going to be visible from any direction you would look at the earring. And now, adding a little bit of super glue again, it's time to glue in the third tube. In this case it's the light blue one. Using the silicone brush, you can add a thinner layer of liquid clay and again a little string of the scrap light blue clay. Don't forget to cut the excess off and then glue in the last tube. Obviously, because it's earrings, you need to make them in a mirror way and as similar as possible and bake in the oven for 30 minutes. Afterwards, place a bit of liquid clay in the end of the biggest tube and place in a little white ball, which doesn't have to fit perfectly, it shall be over the edge, and cut off the excess with a sharp blade. And now smooth everything with your fingers. it's time to pierce a hole in the middle of that with your wire. Do that slowly so you don't destroy that white unbaked clay. And once you are done, bake those 2 earrings in the oven for 30 minutes. And afterwards, it's time to sand those edges again. Use fine sandpaper or old sanding block. Pierce the wire through again, and you can see that there is a hoop that I made with jewelry pliers. And by adding a little bit of super glue, glue in the hoop in the inner side of the tube, basically on the other side of the white clay we added before the last baking. And after it's glued, we will add a little bit of the next scrap clay. Obviously we will need a liquid clay again, and roll the scrap clay into a cone, cut in half, and make sure that it will fit through. Dip it in the liquid clay and then carefully put it through the biggest tube, so we can secure the wire from the other inner side as well. Now by using some other tool, it can be a brush, you can secure the clay in the center of the tube. And now it's time to add those little cute balls at the top of the tubes. So I made 3 of them, 3 sizes. Use liquid clay and add them on the top of your earrings. Those little beads are unbaked, and by using liquid clay you will attach them on the previously baked clay. I'm adding the biggest one on the top next to the earring hoop, and then 2 smaller ones which will go on the center of those earrings. You can decide about the composition as you would like to, and then it's time to bake those earrings for the very last time in the oven for 30 minutes on a piece of glass, for example. And after it's baked, we are going to bend the wire to shape nicely the earring hook. Basically you can use any tool and marker, for example, which will give you a nice rounded shape. And take your time, because in the end you need to make sure that both of those earrings are having the same shape. You can cut the rest of the wire if you would like to make them a little bit shorter by using jewelry pliers. And to make the earrings comfortable for wearing, it's good to take a little sanding paper and sand the edges and the ends of those wires. Just make sure that nothing hurts when the earrings are being worn. And this is how the finished earrings look like. Congratulations if you made your own. I believe that there are so many different possibilities and color combinations. If you created yours, please share them with me on social media so I can have a look as well. As a little bonus, I would love to share with you some tips and tricks when stenciling on polymer clay. Obviously, there are many different types of stencils. There are those plastic ones or paper ones. In this class, I've been working with metal stencils. They've come in paper sustainable packaging, and once you open that, you can see the size of the stencils, which is around 12 to 12 centimeters. So far I've designed 15 different patterns. Some of them are more geometric, some of them slightly abstract. I think there is something for everyone. You can use them on polymer clay with many other mediums, such as pan pastels or mica pigments or regular pigments or maybe even glitters. The possibilities are quite endless when it comes to stenciling technique. Let me tell you a bit about my range of color pigments. Next to black and white, you will find there the cyan, magenta and yellow as primary colors. There are also 5 neon colors such as yellow, pink, green, blue and orange. And I think you will really enjoy the gold and copper as metallic ones. They are perfect. And I'm gonna show you a little example when combining those 3 primaries. Those color pigments are super highly saturated. That means that you only need a tiny little bit when using the color pigment on polymer clay or with acrylic paints and any other materials. So here we are having magenta, yellow and cyan. And by using stencil with floral motif and then white primo clay and 2 thin brushes, I'm going to show you a little example how to use the stencils in a very colorful, almost a rainbow version. After conditioning and burnishing the sheet of white clay, let's add on the top the metal stencil and slightly roll over with the roller so the stencil attach nicely to the sheet of clay. Cut the excess off because you don't want the white clay to get dirty. And I'm using here just a tiny little bit of yellow, and again working with the lid because I don't need to put too much on the end of the brush. And I'm coloring slightly the yellow parts of the leaves and then tinting them and making a shadow with the magenta. The beautiful thing when it comes to working just with primaries is mixing all those different shades and colors. You can mix the color pigments aside and mix them together into a different shade, but here I'm mixing them directly on the sheet of clay because I kind of like the process, and it's also the easiest way how to do the full metal stencils and color that quite quickly. Although in this way it takes like 15-20 minutes until you get it all. When working with color pigments, you will also realize that it's quite nice to keep different brushes for different colors. It saves a lot of cleaning time. And now it's time to peel off the stencil carefully and see the actual result. Don't forget to clean the metal stencils from pigment so you can use them easily for the next time. Now for the example number 2, I'm going to work with this metal stencil and I'm going to do something different. The first thing is that I'm covering here the whole sheet of white clay with purple and magenta. Sometimes I'm just using subtle tones. I don't need to put too much on the pigment because you can play in the end with the saturation of the whole sheet. And now it's time to peel off the metal stencil carefully. And you can place it back again, but slightly move it like 2 millimeters to the other side. For the second layer, you can choose a bit darker color. I'm going here with a blue, more saturated color that is going to be layered over the first layer, and it's going to create a lovely result. Now you can see when peeling off the metal stencil that there is quite three-dimensional effect, and it gives a very different result than the first one. For the third example, I chose this floral motif. The polymer clay is not pure white, it's slightly beige. I mixed some scrap clay that I had on my table. And I'm coloring here some flowers with the purple color pigment, and then I'm making the shades around with the magenta, which is more saturated. And in the end, there is also orange that I added because it felt like a nice color combination. Doing my best when layering the pigments over each other and creating subtle tones and then more saturated one because I kind of like the play of that. The difference with this third example is that I'm going to add a texture on top of the stencil. Here you can see my set of texture sponges. I chose one of them which has a bit more coarse effect, and step by step I'm adding the texture over the metal stencils onto the sheet. You can do that manually by hand or using a roller and changing the direction of the texture sponge so you can get more textured effect. And when peeling off the metal stencil and looking closely, you will see that there is a nice texture effect on the top of the sheet.
Thank you so much for watching my class. I hope you will have some fun while creating your own cube earrings. And you can find more about me at Štruncová.com or on Instagram. And also about the Polymer Week in general, you can find more at polymerweek.com. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.